If you want an AD carry with great self-sufficiency, laning phase, and great consistency no matter the team comp, Ezreal is an amazing choice to add to any marksman champion pool. Welcome to the ultimate guide to Ezreal. Here's a quick breakdown of how we'll be going over the video. I'll touch on general concepts of Ezreal's purpose as a champion and what success looks like in games that you're doing well on him. We'll then discuss different components of his kit and how we can work better to optimize each one of these. But first, if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more content like this. It's free, you can always unsub if you want later as well. On to the video. So let's kick off with runes here. For Ezreal's runes, there's a couple of rune pages that have seen good amounts of play. The first one is a standard Conqueror page that he's been using for quite some time now, thanks to a combination of great consistency and stats, with also a great secondary stat line to back it up. There's also a newer First Strike page that gives us the vibes of the Kleptomancy Ezreal we've seen in the past. We'll touch on both of these pages and each of their potential strengths as well. So starting with the Conqueror page, the most common follow-up runes within the precision tree are Presence of Mind, Legend Bloodline, and Cut Down or Coup de Grace depending on the matchup. All of these runes are great feel-good options that cover up any potential problems Ezreal might have on his way to his coveted mid-game power spike. Presence of Mind is an excellent choice overall because of its ability to prevent most mana problems for Ezreal, especially in the early game. Legend Bloodline is an awesome sustain tool that basically removes the need for Ezreal to itemize any sustain items. The last tree here also gives you access to both Cut Down and Coup de Grace, two amazing runes that allow you to increase your damage output in teamfights significantly under the right circumstances. There's good reason why so many AD carry champions prefer to go with a precision primary page, and this is a really great example of that. To follow up on this tree, most players will opt for a sorcery second to follow it up, with Mana Flow Band and Transcendence being really good options here. I personally can also recommend Gathering Storm instead of Transcendence to swap the kit out for a bit heavier of a damage punch. Moving on to the First Strike page, where things get a little bit more interesting. This kit trades out a little bit of the damage and creature comforts that the Conqueror page provided in exchange for a potentially huge influx of gold that allows Ezreal to accelerate himself tremendously and access his items way before he's normally supposed to. This page is fueled of course by the inspiration page and revolves around taking First Strike, free boots, cookies, and cosmic insight, with the primary page following up with a precision secondary with Presence of Mind and Legend Bloodline as the secondary runes to follow up. To not much surprise to many, this page is honestly also still very effective for Ezreal, with a few decent comfort runes to help ease him through the early game. Cookies have always been fairly exceptional to use, especially in situations where it's pretty important to sustain and stay in lane for as long as possible. As Ezreal's goal in lane is more so to simply survive and thrive, this, along with the free boots, helps him stabilize well and helps him get his items. Cosmic Insight is also a really great rune in slot here. Keep in mind, regardless of which page you run here, your stat line runes are always going to be attack speed, adaptive force, and armor, which are usually the best in slot options except for magic heavy lanes, in which case you can probably get away with taking the MR rune instead in the third tree. Now on to matchups. Ezreal's consistency in terms of his playstyle and his non-reliance on his teammates in most situations is what tends to make him a good solo queue pick. He's not going to dominate every matchup and kingdom every opponent in sight, but he's a very reliable pick that specializes in neutralizing most matchups and can play both forward and back depending on the situation. An important distinction to make here is that the support matchup will also have a material impact on the way Ezreal can play out his lanes, so when evaluating your game plan before the game starts, it's pretty important to look at both of these components. Really aggressive laners like Tristana and Lucian make your life fairly difficult overall, since they can both close the gap onto you and use their strong stat line to make it hard for you to play the game. In these lanes, your objective is mainly to just stabilize and farm, and getting through the laning phase without a death is generally considered a win. With the right support like Leona or Nautilus, you can still have decent kill threat or potentially even win out on these matchups at times, so again, keep that contextually in mind. Heavy scaling champions like Vayne, Jinx, and Kog'Maw are actually decently scary for Ezreal. This is not because they're difficult to lane against, but more so because it puts the onus on the Ezreal to actually dominate lane and completely shut down these champions. Although he can be played really aggressively if he wants to, Ezreal does have some limitations to his output in this sense, so he has to work really hard in order to dumpster champs compared to other true lane bullies in the game. Against fellow poke type champions like Ashe, Kate, Sivir, or Ziggs, Ezreal tends to fare pretty well, because he also has tools in his kit that can match the laning objectives of these champions and can generally manage. It's a bit of a case-by-case basis, but in most scenarios, as long as you're able to hit your strides and farm safely for your mid-game power spike, Ezreal usually fares pretty well. Moving on to build. Out of every AD carry in the game, Ezreal is probably one of the most unique and unorthodox when it comes to itemization. Compared to most ADCs that build crit-based items, Ezreal very much emulates the playstyle of a caster champion. His Q literally can't crit, so this automatically puts him in this weird playstyle to begin with. Since this guide is meant to be relatively timeless, I won't touch on a couple of weird builds that you might see prominently in pro play from time to time, as Ezreal has been known to be a weird abuser of many of these. So let's start off with Mythics. The main things that distinguish Ezreal's build paths are the following. the fact that he doesn't do well with crit chance, and that his strength lies around his ability to consistently proc Sheen thanks to his Q. With that in mind, your tried and true mythics are going to be items like Trinity Force and Divine Sunderer. These items have served him well ever since the item reworks and will likely to continue doing so for the foreseeable future. The main differentiator that makes you choose between these items is essentially based on your role in the game. Sunderer is going to be the better option when you need more consistent scaling, as its percent damage is a great asset on that front. However, for situations when that isn't really the case, Trinity Force then becomes an incredible option for you, because its base damage is actually rather high. Another item that Ezreal pairs very often with his core mythics is his tier item of choice, and more specifically these days Manamune. This item paired with his mythic of choice for the game becomes his bread and butter itemization, and allows you to freely spam your abilities and output damage once you hit your power spikes in Muramana. From this point, your choices become much more free-flowing depending on the needs of the game and the enemy composition and damage type. Since Ezreal can typically deal damage from so far away, he can get away without certain items that other ADCs might more commonly need, such as QSS. There are games where it's still necessary, but the hope is to actually utilize this enhanced safety to sort of itemize more damage in a way, and in turn actually deal more damage. Items like Serilda's Grudge and Ravenous Hydra feel really good for him in this regard, with other more defensive options like Guardian Angel and Maw of Memordius also serving really well when needed. Campunk Chainsword is a great choice if what you need is some heal cut, and for boots, Lucids are probably going to be the best in slot choice, with both Merc Treads and Plated Steel Caps good for those emergency situations. In addition to these core items that Ezreal's like to buy, still keep an eye out on other websites like ProBuilds or OPGG to keep an eye on some potential crazy builds that players tend to do, because it is in these scenarios that you can find hidden gems that can shift the meta. Onto combos or technical skills. As arguably the OG caster type AD carry, Ezreal is home to many combos that structure his playstyle but also allow ample opportunity for players to get creative. Although there aren't too many insane combo variations that will drastically shift your entire damage output around, these are good, consistent little tricks that will help you be more mechanically consistent in your games as well. So let's get started here. The first one is a bit of a lane trick that's commonly done by aggressive Ezreal players in high elo and pro play, and this is the WE weave. As Ezreal, it's very easy to get into the habit of playing relatively defensive and just focus on being able to survive the laning phase, but it's also quite important to be having your own impact on your games as well and putting pressure in lane. In lane on Ezreal, you'll tend to be fishing for things like hitting straight Qs so that you can whittle down your opponents, but you can also do the same with your W. Keep in mind that W allows your next ability to gain a full refund and gives you some mana back, and with your E, it becomes an auto lock as well. So hitting W and then following up aggressively with E in lane can be a really good way to get a big chunk of damage off, creating more pressure than you normally would in these sorts of situations. The main trade-off to this, of course, is that you're burning your escape in order to deal damage in lane, so if you're not comfortable with this move and you end up using it recklessly, you can easily get yourself caught out as a result. So practice it, know your limits, so you can understand when you can and cannot use it. The next little micro trick you can do is not necessarily a combo, but something to help maximize your damage in other scenarios. Ezreal can actually buffer his True Shot barrage while getting CC'd, such that he will cast it anyway. It takes approximately 1 second to fully cast it, and since Ezreal can't be doing anything anyway, some players take advantage of this downtime in order to maximize their damage output even in potentially the least likely of scenarios. You can even kind of buffer your own flash while casting ultimate to alter your positioning, which makes for some really weird mix-ups. The last one I like to use personally is to do an E-flash combo from time to time. This one tends to surprise a lot of your opponents because it just allows you to close so much more distance than normal. This will generally be used in aggressive scenarios where you've identified an opportunity that you can go in, but you need that extra bit of oomph to really push yourself. In these situations, opting for the E-flash combo is really helpful. Just make sure not to mix it up and go for flash E instead, because that makes the overall movement much slower and less intuitive. Quickly touching on team fights, overall, I think Ezreal's dynamic is going to follow what most AD carries are going to require in the game, and that's going to be sitting in the back, dealing what damage you can to the targets that you can hit, and then identifying your windows to go in once no key cooldowns on the enemy team remain. Dodging long range engage and dealing consistent damage with your Qs or autos are going to be what keeps up your damage in a fight, and as long as you're alive, you'll be able to keep on damaging opponents. So this was a quick, dense, but concise guide on how to play out Ezreal in your own games, and hopefully this was helpful and productive for you guys at home, and I will catch you in the next one. Stay fresh.